Mayor de Blasio lies again about info kept from investigators in Rivington House probe. Mayor de Blasio denied Friday that his team withheld from investigators a crucial memo about a Lower East Side nursing home that wound up as condos, but a document obtained by the Daily News shows that's not true. The July 29, 2014, memo shows city officials were well aware that a private sale of the high-value property was discussed early on. On his radio show Friday, WNYC host Brian Lehrer asked de Blasio whether City Corporation Counsel Zachary Carter had withheld the specific memo from the Department of Investigation. "That's not true," the mayor replied. Zach Carter put out publicly that some of the very memos that were claimed to have been quote-unquote withheld had been provided to the Department of Investigation. He literally said, "Here's when we provided those memos in question, here's the date." That was months ago in this case. So this is becoming the telephone game. We provided the information. I'm sorry, some reporters have just blatantly ignored the fact that we laid out exactly when we gave those memos, and we had every reason to be transparent about those memos," he said. A document obtained by the News Friday shows the memo provided to investigators on April 11 was almost entirely whited out. Carter gave DOI probers 2 blank sheets of paper showing only the memo's date and the letters DP for deliberative process, the rationale for withholding the memo. The document states the memo was subject to a confidentiality agreement with the Comptroller's office, though on Friday a spokesman for Comptroller Scott Stringer, Eric Summerg, said, "There is no confidentiality agreement." Late Friday, de Blasio Press Secretary Eric Phillips admitted the document was, indeed, turned over to DOI in redacted form. He said a privilege log also turned over notified DOI that the July 29 memo was being withheld. Sources familiar with the matter say after DOI received the whited-out version, investigators realized immediately what it was because they'd obtained an unredacted version from another source. The Law Department produced the documents in question in redacted form, DOI said in a statement. DOI then obtained the contents of those documents from alternate sources and made follow-up demands of the Law Department. Only then did the Law Department meet its legal obligation to produce those specific documents. The unredacted memo, written by the staff of a city agency overseeing deed restrictions, specifically lists one option for the nursing home was to allow a private sale and states, many non-profits would want to sell high-value deed-restricted property. The home is located in the Lower East Side, where property values have skyrocketed in a gentrification gold rush. The memo goes on to recommend denying the sale and turning the property into affordable housing or transferring it to another non-profit. Instead, the non-profit went on to sell it for $28 million. The buyer then paid the city $16 million to drop the deed restriction, and sold it for $116 million to a condo developer. The unredacted memo specifically mentions briefing deputy mayors, including Anthony Shores, about the proposals. Shores has claimed he knew nothing about the nursing home transaction until this year, after the property was sold for an enormous profit. He claims he believed the sellers always intended to keep it as a nursing home, but Doi found numerous emails and memos sent to and by Shories about the Rivington St. deal, specifically noting that the sellers were considering selling the property for development. De Blasio also says he was completely out of the loop on the transaction until it surfaced as an issue in March. Doi found notes of a meeting about Rivington that Shories had forwarded to the mayor in August 2014. The mayor told Doi he didn't recall that email. When Doi began looking into the deal, investigators say Carter took the unprecedented step of appointing himself gatekeeper for all documents, and blocked access to the computer hard drives serving the mayor, Shories, and 2 other top deputies. Carter also redacted as not relevant another memo that detailed a second deed restriction waiver request regarding property owned by the Harlem Dance Theatre. De Blasio spokesman Phillips said Doi never asked City Hall for documents relating to other deed restrictions, noting, their requests to City Hall were solely about the Rivington transaction. He said ultimately the law department turned over the memo with the Harlem Dance Theatre portion unredacted. De Blasio said during an April 1 appearance on NY1 that he'd asked Doi to investigate the Rivington sale and added, "We also are going to use this investigation to show us exactly what we need to change in the approach the city takes so this cannot happen again in the future." He noted, "We're going to take a very close look not only at that agency, but any other agency that deals with deed restrictions because this again goes against all my values." Last week Doi wrote to Carter threatening to go to court to force the release of all the documents in unredacted form, and demanding total access to the mayor's computers. On Tuesday Carter agreed to their demands. On the Lehrer Show, the mayor made a point of defending Shories, saying he had total confidence in the top aide, who, he pointed out, is extremely busy. When Lehrer asked how Shories could have missed that the city was paid $16 million to ditch the deed limits, the mayor declared the amount wasn't big enough to notice. "Here's the simple way of saying it," he replied. In the context of an $82 billion budget, in the context of all the issues we deal with every day, 16 million. I care deeply about 16 million, as do the taxpayers, but compared to everything else we deal with, it is on the smaller side of the equation. Doi is the city's independent watchdog. By executive order, the agency has unlimited access to city agency internal communications, including emails. In this case, Doi Commissioner Mark Peters has had to recuse himself from the investigation of Rivington and an unrelated probe into the mayor's campaign fundraising. Peters was, for a time, the mayor's campaign treasurer. But his staff has pressed forward with both investigations, and have characterized Carter's intervention as unprecedented. Multiple officials familiar with how the Doi conducts business say the involvement of the Department of Law in vetting documents requested by Doi is, in fact, unprecedented in modern history. No Doi commissioner has been forced to threaten a lawsuit to get documents from a city agency during the administrations of David Dinkins, 1990 to 1993, Rudy Giuliani, 1994 to 2001, and Mayor Michael Bloomberg, 2002 to 2013. Both Carter and the mayor have called the dispute between the law department and DOI normal.